Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome back to another Mortal Kombat video. Now originally, I did actually plan on having this video as the top 5 worst rebooted characters of the new era, but after last week's video and reception, thank you for wonderfully supporting it by the way. One of the really interesting takeaways from the comment section is that they've messed up the timeline, or that these characters have changed too much, now becoming someone they don't recognize. So with that in mind, it did actually raise the question of, has Mortal Kombat changed too much? And is it suffering from an identity crisis? Well, before we do begin into the breakdown, I do wish to preface and say I will be looking at it from an objective point of view, because the new era introduces just as many new great ideas as it does bad ones. Thus, with the game also going through some very public ass kicking right now, I do wish you all to go into this with a bit of a fresh mind, as we will be talking about what works and what doesn't work here narratively. So there's a bit of a case here for both sides. But before we do begin here, as always, if you're liking these sort of topic videos and wish to see more, please do give it a thumbs up, as it does help the channel in the algorithm a lot. Anywho, let's just jump right into things. Now, admittedly, creating a completely new era and timeline is quite the undertaking, as doing such an effort can be very delicate in what changes and what remains the same, especially with 30 plus years of lore and canon to work off. Plus, with 9 being a soft reboot, 1 was always naturally going to be in competition with itself, especially against a game as beloved as MK9. But despite 9's grandiose reputation, I do believe this is where cracks begin to show, and really where the identity crisis stems from. As well, it's a retelling of Mortal Kombat 1 to 2 to 3. It's not entirely a fateful one, as there are many deviations in the late game, but many more in terms of origin and creation. Luckily, a lot of this can be overlooked due to the effective streamlining of said characters. So as you're gonna see and notice, there's a lot of give and take here when it comes to those changes, as the arcade era of storytelling allowed for a much simpler way to explain the story. So in a way, 9 did have a very hard job of translating that over well. Yet even so, they did it with a lot of positive reception, adding a modern flair and twist, which was really common for reboots in the early 2010s. Although, I definitely do not agree with every creative decision, I find there to be beauty in its imperfections, as it allows it to stand on its own 2 legs as a reboot, in a time where reboots were pretty ass. Now Mortal Kombat 1, on the other hand, is quite different in the reboot department, as whilst it does retain the canonical continuity like 9's, the open canvas that 11 leaves us with allows for a lot more creative freedom with the characters. One's not burdened by the inherent legacy of their names like 9's. So moving forward, characters could be challenged and approached in familiar yet different scenarios from what we've seen, much to the benefit and dismay of some characters. With that said, should we have rebooted? Should we have gone back to the very beginning here? Well, yeah, I must reluctantly say so. And there has been a lot of contributing factors that have affected my feelings on it. As one of the biggest issues that was introduced in MK11 were the Titans and Kronika herself, beings of high divinity and celestials that literally warp reality. When you're battling characters like that, you essentially hit a ceiling of sorts, where you can't push beyond that much more of a big bad, as the only other character you could toss into the fray here would actually be the one being, and that kind of means the end of reality itself. My point is that we eventually hit a ceiling where the only way to go back would be to reset things. And I definitely think that was the right call here. With that said, would I have liked to maybe have seen a different time period? Yeah, I would have loved to explore the saga of the Great Kung Lao, as it's a time period constantly alluded to. But even with that in mind, I think we'd be in the same position we are now, with reinterpreting new and different characters. While safe, I find it to be a wise starting point for the new era, especially considering when it comes to introducing newer fans to the franchise. Plus, it serves as the perfect opportunity to give the Reboot trilogy fans a good gateway to that of the 3D characters, as many have been missing since Armageddon. By wiping the slates clean, it allows us to lose a lot of baggage that may have bogged characters down, whether that be questionable writing decisions, character deaths, or even retcons. I feel like the new era decision was definitely a beneficial one in opening up the character variety pool. And I think if MKX and 11 made things pretty clear, is that fans are more interested in meeting older faces than that of newer ones. So considering how hefty the overall narrative of the Reboot trilogy was with its timey-wimey stuff, I think the new era needed to happen. With that out the way, we do get the shuffle over to Characterization, and of course, the identity crisis in the title. Truth be told, I think that these cracks have been showing for a very long time now, going as far back as that of the 3D trilogy, as it itself was prone to character changes and soft retcons. It's only until the NRS era where these changes were prevalent and even acknowledged by the game itself, allowing deviations from the main narrative to take fruition. For MK9, these changes were done to emphasize the narrative and didn't change too loosely until its climax. A perfect example is Cyber Sub-Zero, a complete anomaly from that of the original timeline, yet one that didn't have a grand impact on the larger narrative. One character though that defies this rule was MK11's interpretation of Empress Sindel. This version is widely divisive amongst fans, as she largely deviates away of her previous conception of faithful wife to power-hungry seductress. And this is where the cracks I mentioned begin to ripple, because if you think about it, in context with everything else I've talked about here, with the changes and the alterations, Sindel could have very well been a bit of a testing ground for MK1 for what changes work and what changes don't. Because on the surface level, although things look to be relatively the same, there are very distinct and sometimes drastic changes that some of these characters have undergone. And this widely ranges across the board here, from personality to origins and mantles. Now, there is one character in particular that I do have to hone in on, because he's been the hot center of this debate, and kind of the character that inspired me to make this video: Scorpion. The Scorpion of this timeline is a widely different version from what we've ever come to know, donned by Kuai Liang of the Lin Kuei. You know, the former Sub-Zero and previous timeline rival of Hanzo Hasashi. This was a massive alteration to anything we've seen before, and although I was admittedly worried, this was a change a lot more people were open to than expected. Narratively, in-game, it was fairly executed, despite what I would say are the limitations of the game's chapter system. I'm still a firm believer that this was pretty damn cool, but would definitely benefit from maybe having a little bit more time to flourish. Understandably, this has been a pretty big change for the canon, but isn't something pulled out of nowhere, as these ideas for Scorpion and Sub-Zero go as far back as that of the original Mortal Kombat, as it was John Tobias's original intended vision to have a feud between these two brothers. Thus, what we see here isn't actually anything new, more so something only ever put down on paper as a concept. But back on the topic of Kuai Liang, I think that many people actually shined up to his character, as Kuai's very likable, and whilst I wouldn't say he is Scorpion, I do think he has served his time under the mantle well. It's just everything after that where things kind of go belly up a bit. The arcade ladder endings of 1 effectively serve as the aftermath for the main narrative, as following Titan Shang's defeat, Bi-Han is able to gain full control of the Lin Kuei, leading a hunt against his own brother. This would force Kwai to not only travel to Japan, but crate the Shirai Ryu, and then wed Harumi Shirai. You know, Hanzo's former wife. And I do think that this is the straw that broke the camel's back. Because it's one thing to take a character's mantle, it's another thing to take his girl. And this was definitely a step too far in that direction. Whilst I'm very open to meeting a much younger Hanzo Hasashi, it's a devastating shame that it's come at the expense of his family. And I think now this actually taints Kuai Liang under the mantle, and inherently makes whatever relationship Hanzo has with Harumi or Kwai a little bit weird. Now mind you, I do want to reiterate that I'm glad they're doing something new with Hanzo. Realistically, there's only so many times we can watch his family die. As iconic as it is, it's effectively become the Uncle Ben of fighting game origins. So something new needed to be done here. And I will say that I do kind of like how they softly imply that there's a greater force driving Harumi and Hanzo apart. It adds to the tragedy of their narrative, as whatever timeline he falls in love with her, he is doomed to lose her. So, in a grander calculus, this does set up a very interesting antagonist for him. I just do sincerely hope that this is something that does take fruition, as such ideas like that have an awful tendency of being dropped. And don't do that to this character, especially after everything he's gone through. Someone or something needs to be held accountable, and I personally would really love to see that. Now, not all narrative changes are negative. I mean, let's look at Reptile here for a second, as whilst he was the first secret character of the franchise, he's largely been overlooked for a very long time, being literally written as a character designed to serve others. He had no ambitions of his own, and was largely burdened by his primal instincts. Coming into the new era though, we have a widely different version, becoming an outcast from his people and enslaved by Shang Tsung. Once he inevitably breaks free of his grasp, he's really able to take on his own character. And this comes from the devastation he feels from his family's loss. As in the aftermath of the story, despite being seen as a freak, he seeks to unite and elevate his own people in Outworld, bringing them honor, glory, and respect. So, not all changes are bad here. Although, admittedly, I'm not the biggest fan of his pairing with Ashura, I can't deny they've done wonders for his character. And a lot of my thoughts and feelings on this also pass over to other characters like Melina and Baraka, having gone from jobbers to now fully fleshed characters that even get their own chapters. So now, of course, it all comes back to the question, is Mortal Kombat having an identity crisis? And I think up to a certain extent, yes. It's what I would say is a bit of a byproduct of creating a new era and generation, the same way that the 3D trilogy and the Reboot trilogy did. It's a really big change, but it's definitely not a bad one. What I do feel though is that this may have all happened too fast, too soon. And the truth of the tale is that change is scary. Inherently, not evolving allows a form of comfort. So this alteration was always going to have some form of friction. But that's not to say that there isn't some good that comes with the bad here. Because in some instances, it might take a little bit of time to flourish. And that is what I think we'll see here. If anything, what we have here are seeds planted for a grander future. I only hope that going forward, things can be fine-tuned and tailored to how we want, with hopefully not as many out there wild ideas. For the most part, I really do like the new era. I think they've done a lot of things really well with the tools they have. My only wish is that going forward, we do have a few more of those key characters be handled a tad bit more delicately, especially if they are returning faces. Of course, we can't change what is right now, but at the very least, voice our concerns and opinions for what we wish to see in the future. So now I'm gonna relay this question to all of you. Do you think too much has changed? Or do you believe this to be for the better of the series? Please do comment down below. And of course, who do you think has benefited the most from the new era? And who hasn't? I'd love to hear and read your comments on this, as I think it's a very interesting topic and discussion for all of us to have. Anywho everyone, that is it for me. Until then, take care. I'll catch you in the next one.